So, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for coming along today's keynote. And we would very much like to ask this session today, now, if you don't mind. So I have particular pleasure of introducing you today's keynote, which is one of the many keynotes that you have seen and you have heard at this conference. Today is the fourth day of the conference, and I have to say I'm very, very impressed that my learned colleagues still have the interest and the energy to come along and listen to furthermore scholarship. My name is Zsuzsanna Varga, and I have the pleasure of introducing you my colleague, Dr. Sandor Hites, who is a senior research fellow at the Research Center for the Humanities, Institute for Literary Studies, Budapest, and this research institute is part of the Hungarian Academy of Sciences. He is the principal researcher for a research group, for a highly esteemed research group, the Political Economy of Hungarian Literature in the 19th Century, which ran between 2019 and 2024, and which was housed at the Institute for Literary Research. Dr. Hites has published extensively on the Hungarian novel, primarily on 19th century Hungarian fiction, 20th century East European literature in exile and diasporic writing, and the economics of literature. Currently, he's finishing a book about the political economy of world literature, forthcoming with the Cambridge University Press. Dr. Hites has held visiting fellowships at the University of London, University of Edinburgh, a visiting professor at Babes-Bolyai University at Cluj, Kolozsvár, and also at the Monk School of Global Affairs, University of Toronto. So I'd very much like to ask you to welcome Dr. Hites and ask him to start his presentation. So thank you very much, and I shall hand it over to you, Sandor, if that's all right.
Thank you so much for the kind introduction. It's a very great honor to be here, and so thanks for the invitation. And when I first saw the overall theme of the conference, I had some vague ideas about what I might contribute with. Probably these ideas have become even more vague through the process, but anyway, thanks for the encouragement to explore them further. So I have some slides. Yeah, all right. And I'll start with a citation, so do not panic. It's not me. I will quote someone else. Okay, here it is. At this moment, is there one of us present, however we may have departed from the Lord, disobeyed his will, and disregarded his word? Is there one of us who would, at this moment, accept all that man could bestow or earth afford, to resign the hope of his salvation? No, there is not one, not such a fool on earth, were the enemy of mankind to traverse it with the offer. This is from the preface of the 4-volume Gothic masterpiece, Mahmoud the Wanderer, written by Reverend Charles Robert Maturin, the curate of St. Peter's Church in Dublin in 1820. Mahmoud was Maturin's 5th novel, and he notes that the idea for the book came from a passage in one of his sermons, and this is the passage that I just recited. And if we look up Maturin's collection of sermons published in London in the previous year, 1819, we do find these lines here, with one more sentence added that makes the theological background of this dilemma even more pronounced. There you go. However, our hearts may be corrupted by the cares, the passions, and the evils of life, there is not one that does not echo to the truth of the awful question of Christ. What shall a man be profited if he gain the whole world and lose his own soul? Or what shall a man give in exchange for his soul? In other words, Mahmoud the Wanderer then offers to be read as a long, and if you are familiar with the novel, you know that a very long, demonstration of a theological argument cast in terms of what is often referred to as the Faustian bargain. There is a dramatic or narrative situation featuring characters that choose to bargain their souls, lives, or shadows, only to end up in even more miserable conditions than the one they had wanted to escape. The most memorable renderings of this trope include, of course, Goethe's Faust, Adalbert von Camisso's Peter Schlemil's Wundersame Geschichte, and Oscar Wilde's Dorian Gray. But these are not the works that I will discuss today. Maturin's story, Melmoth the Wanderer, takes us back to 17th century Ireland. The central character, Melmoth, sells his soul to the devil for an impressive repertoire of supernatural powers. He can walk through walls and doors, he can read other people's minds, etc. And he also receives an extension of his natural span of life by 150 years. We learn about his wanderings in space and time that takes him from Ireland to Spain to Scotland to the Indian Ocean and back, from a string of intricately embedded narratives as reconstructed by his nephew, who tracks Melmoth's roots in testimonies of witnesses and old manuscripts written in various languages from Spanish to Hebrew. Melmoth, however, Melmoth himself rarely appears on the scene. But we do learn at some point that he came to regret this deal, the bargain, and he wants to find a substitute to redeem himself. And in order to do so, he approaches several characters in extremely wretched conditions, like jailed, tortured, in the face of starvation, etc. But his offer is consistently turned down throughout the novel. As he cries out at the end in a sublime scene of damnation, "I have traversed the world in the search, and no one to gain that word would lose his own soul." Okay, so Melmoth's story, I would suggest, on the one hand, showcases Gothic fiction's profound engagements with theology. As many have observed, and I must mention Victor Sage's path-breaking book and Alison Miliband's and Jonathan Greenaway's more recent work. So as they have observed, Gothic is an eminently theological genre, and a Protestant one at that, the popularity of which in late 18th century Britain was bound up with widespread anti-Catholic sentiments and public debates about Catholic emancipation. Hence the prominence of sadistic monks and other horrors of the monastery in Maturin's novel as well. So as a site for expressing, scrutinizing, and challenging religious truths by the means of terrifying entertainment, Gothic drew on and exacerbated the inbuilt uncertainty of Calvinist theology's tenets concerning salvation. In his double career as a clergyman and a literary author, Maturin, who was a descendant of French Huguenots, in a sense personified these connections of theology and literature. And by opening intertextual links between novel and sermon, he explored the permeability of their textual and ideological boundaries. On the other hand, Gothic's engagement with economics have also been explored. You see Judith or Jack Halberstam's and Gail Thurley Houston's books on the right side of the slide. In the recognition that Gothic tropes, from the invisible hand to various forms of vampirism, were important sources of 18th and 19th century economic imagery, supplying allegories for both pro- and anti-capitalism arguments, or providing mental, psychological mechanisms for readers to sublimate the real-life horrors of commercial society, financial panics, for example. In Maturin's case, we might add, this economic background is rather straightforward. So he wanted to supplement his modest income as a curate, as a clergyman in Dublin, by the writing of novels. In other words, he wanted to make Gothic money with Gothic fiction. As he confessed to Walter Scott in 1813, "I have in fact been always more conversant with the visions of another world than the realities of this. And in my romance, I have determined to display all my diabolical resources and get possession of the magic lamp with all its slaves from the conjurer Louis himself. I fear, however, they will never build a palace of gold for me as they did for their master Aladdin." So Scott, who was a bit of a mentor figure to Maturin, he greatly admired Maturin's work, and in his apology for for the benefits of the literary trade or the literary market, which he believed gave justice to artistic merits in appropriate measures, and that's why he protested against the reintroduction of royal patronage in 1821. And in his protest that he was addressing the king, who was about to found the Royal Society of Literature, so why he insisted on the benevolence of the market, he still named two geniuses who remained unrewarded by the market: Maturin and Coleridge. I will return to this aspect in the closing part of the lecture. But I would like to examine a bit more today is how Goethe's affinities with theology and economics intersect in the Faustian bargain, a terrifying act of metaphysical exchange. That human life is enmeshed in a bargain situation is one of the lessons that the Gospels teach us. What Maturin references as the awful question of Christ, that is, for what shall it profit a man if he shall gain the whole world and lose his own soul? Or what shall a man give in exchange for his soul? Comes from Mark 8, 36, 37, where Christ confronts his disciples with a sort of inverted economy, whereby in the great settling of earthly and heavenly accounts, it is gain that leads to ultimate loss, perdition, and it is loss that leads to ultimate gain, that is salvation. As you see on the slide, for whosoever will save his life shall lose it, but whosoever shall lose his life for my sake and the Gospels, the same shall save it. Maturin, I suggest, frames the bargain with a similar cost-benefit analysis and insists, as we saw in the first slide, that only a fool would make such a gross miscalculation and throw away eternal happiness for earthly goods. And in his sermons, he encourages his audience to resign the husks of temporal existence and banquet on the bread of immortality in our Father's house. And he also reminds them, the audience, that there is then a pleasure that earth cannot give. That sort of pleasure will be our portion there. Okay, setting the chances of infinite pleasure against the reality of finite pain, Maturin's warning seems to hark back to the famed thought experiment known as Pascal's wager. Credited with laying the ground for the theory of probability, Pascal's argument, which was recycled in Britain, among others, by Locke and Hume, captures human life as an unavoidable metaphysical gamble, a game of chance in a heads or tails situation, whether God exists or not. And in this game, we are compelled to bet. As Balzac puts it, you must wager. It is not optional. So we better, if we have this compulsion, then we better weigh the stakes against expected gain or expected loss. And considering that by giving up earthly pleasures, only a finite amount of loss is at risk, and an infinite amount of joy, that is eternal life, may be won, it is reasonable, Pascal suggests, to bet on God and consequently lead a virtuous life. As you see on the slide, wherever there is infinity, and when there are not infinite chances of losing against that of winning, there is no room for hesitation. You must give everything. How does Pascal's wager relate to the Faustian bargain? Do they complement or rather contradict one another? Both revolve, for sure, around expected utility. Yet what is at stake for fictional characters like Melmoth is not the probability of a transcendental order. The possibility that such a deal can be offered by the devil in the first place presupposes or confirms the existence of the supernatural, at least within the confines of fiction, in the world of fiction. Thus, the Faustian bargain is not a gamble, but a choice to be made between considerable short-term advantages and infinitely larger but long-term gains. What reintroduces, however, the moment of gambling into these bargains is that these characters like Melmoth, they offer something for exchange that they do not actually possess. As Maturin himself recognizes, it is only their hope of redemption that they can put up for sale. Because salvation may come from God's inexplicable grace, not in return for good deeds that we might have done in the expectation of heavenly rewards. So it's not a trade in the real sense. The doctrine of predestination lurks in the background of Calvinist Gothic's fascination with fate and with divided selves tortured by the anxiety whether they belong to the circle which God had pre-elected for heavenly life. Hence the laments of Melmoth that in all his wanderings, no one has exchanged destinies with him, as he puts it, which demonstrates perhaps that he was predestined to fail all the time, or on the contrary, that others were free to turn down his offer just as much as his own initial choice was free. Predestination, or what Leszek Kolakowski, you see the cover of his famed book on the slide. So what Kolakowski has deemed the most formidable and intractable puzzle of Christian thinking, the confrontation of divine grace with the human free will, was also a central problem in the quarrels of Jesuit modernizers and Jansenist reactionaries, a quarrel to which Pascal himself had contributed with his wager. And whereas Jesuits wanted to adjust Christianity to modernity by seeking excuse for all kinds of human depravities and crimes, especially in the aristocracy and the court, Pascal shared the Jansenist principle that, as Kolakowski put it, God owes us nothing, because salvation is not a reward, but a gift, undeserved and unearned. Redemption or damnation, therefore, is not a matter of exchange, but it is imposed on us in a one-way transaction, whether we like it or not. This is precisely what makes, I believe, for Pascal, the wager inescapable. However, the ultimate uncertainty of salvation, one might risk the suggestion, seems to make it more reasonable to accept the bargain. To paraphrase Pascal, wherever there is a chance of infinite loss, you should opt for finite gain. That is why Maturin has to assert in the preface to the novel that even the hope that religion offers still gives more than life gives to the happiest, because it points not to time, but to futurity. A sense of futurity, or an infinitely distant point of accounting, also drives the modern credit economy and its constant postponing of debts. These economic calculations of value come to the fore in Balzac's novella Melmoth Reconciled, a sequel or parody, if you like, of Maturin's work, written in 1835. In Balzac's story, Melmoth arrives in Paris in 1821, which is symbolical because that was the year when the French translation of Maturin's novel appeared. So Melmoth arrives in Paris, and he seems to have come to the right place. Because Paris, that city of, as Balzac puts it, fiery ordeals and branch establishment of hell, abounds in characters ready to sell their souls. So whereas in Maturin's novel there is only one person, Melmoth himself, who is willing to engage in trade with the devil, in Balzac's the offer is never turned down, and the contract with the devil is exchanged numerous times. The first buyer, Castanier, is a cashier. That is someone who, as a special variety of human nature produced in the social kingdom, conducts commercial exchange as a way of living, as a form of life. The story begins with Castanier embezzling a large sum from the house of Nucingen. And it is the moment when he's forging the baron's signature on a letter of credit that he's first approached by Melmoth. But first, with stolen cash and credit in hand, Castanier wants to flee to Italy via London. But then he chooses to stay and accept Melmoth's offer in order to win back his young mistress, who wants to leave him with a remarkably Melmothian gesture. She says that if by any means whatever, by selling my hopes of eternity, for instance, I could recover my past self, body and soul, for I have perhaps redeemed my soul, and be pure as a lily for my lover, I would not hesitate a moment. So this is important because you see that this is a wider pattern. So it's not just Melmoth and the cashier who has this who occupies this role, but other characters can inhabit this role or this dilemma as well. Okay, but whether virginity could be restored in this way is not tested in the novel. But the traces of Castanier's crimes are easily erased. And it is worth noting that when Melmoth makes his offer to Castanier, he does so with an inversion of Pascal's suggestion that by casting our bid for God, we could end up actually believing in God. As he says, as Melmoth says to Castanier, you hardly believe in anything, perhaps? Well, if all this comes to pass, you will believe at least in the devil. Having taken his place in the contract, Castanier employs Melmoth's powers to exhaust all the pleasures of the earth. Yet he soon becomes wearied of them. First of all, in his view, Paris becomes, as he says, as little interesting as an ant heap by the roadside. He learns then in a painful way that with possession, the vast poetry of desire must end. And as, and I also quote, the alternations that measure joy and pain and diversify human happiness no longer existed for him. That is, the very notion of pleasure becomes meaningless as soon as the division between joy and pain is blurred. In the end, then Castanier wants to get rid of the contract. And desperately looking for a buyer, he realizes that there is one place where ideas and beliefs have their price and everything is discounted, where God himself borrows on the security of his revenue of souls. For the Pope has a running account there. So he goes to the Paris Stock Exchange, obviously. Which is remarkable because with this Balzac adds the financial arena of panic to traditional Gothic scenes such as the jail or the madhouse. And Balzac portrays the stock market as a vast card table. And here, at this card table, the bargain is, Melmoth's deal is introduced as the devil's bond. And the first buyer is a merchant named Claparon, who has a reputation for taking heavy risks that meant wealth or utter ruin. Which means that, in a sense, he applies Pascal's advice to finance, meaning that if the potential gain is large enough, then you should give all you have. You should move everything. And pressured by creditors, Claparon purchases the bond in exchange for his shares in the great speculation of eternity. But once he has repaid his debts, the unmistakable power of the deal frightens him. Claparon went on change again and offered his bargain to other men in embarrassed circumstances. The devil's bond, together with the rights, easement, and privileges appertaining thereunto, to use the expression of the notary who succeeded Claparon, changed hands for the sum of 700,000 francs. The notary, in his turn, parted with the agreement with the devil for 500,000 francs to a building contractor in difficulties, who likewise was rid of it to an iron merchant in consideration of 100,000 crowns. In fact, by 5 o'clock, people had ceased to believe in the strange contract, and purchasers were lacking for want of confidence. That is, the bond goes through many hands in the industrial financial sphere, and it is eagerly exchanged by entrepreneurs and bureaucrats facing financial difficulties. Yet, importantly, this whole thing takes place at a rapidly decreasing price. And we know that we learned that the last buyer is a clerk who merely wants to earn the favors of a prostitute with a kerchief that's worth 100 francs. And in return for this gift, the kerchief, he is permitted into this prostitute's bedroom, where he dies after a 12-day session of, I quote, love and riot and forgetfulness, for which he had bartered away all his hopes of a paradise to come. End of quote. 12 days. One may note that in these exchanges taking place in the space of a single day, not only the possessors change swiftly, but the deal itself goes through transformation. There is less and less value attached to it. And in the end, this value dissipates altogether, regardless of the power that it unmistakably holds. So we might say that Balzac recasts the rules of the deal in terms that are more reminiscent of modern speculative finance than ordinary commercial transfers. Because for Maturin or Pascal, for that matter, gamblers of salvation can only guess how large the values at stake really are and how they compare in what appears to be an essentially zero-sum game. But at least they can be certain that these values are not going to change over time. Balzac, by contrast, introduces contingency into the bargain. So rather than trading in predetermined, yet beforehand unknown, and constant, although potentially infinite, amounts of gain and loss, the sum of values circulating here remains dynamic and, as a rule, tends to decrease, regarding both the pleasures derived from the bargain and the steadily plummeting price at which it is repurchased. So counting these fluctuating levels of credit invested in the bargain, Balzac's narrative seemed to resonate more with economic notions such as diminishing returns or marginal utility, not a closed circuitry of fixed values. So diminishing returns, this notion of David Ricardo's suggesting that capital accumulation is by necessity not infinite because at some point returns will diminish. And marginal utility is a term from neoclassical economy later from the century, suggesting that value is basically subjective and depends on the utility it may or may not have for the consumer. In Balzac's story, theological futurity, that is the possibility of an ultimate divine judgment, is not denied, but neglected under the pressure of more immediate needs and desires dictated by the market. For example, we learned that if Moses himself had appeared at the stock change, I quote, "the gentleman whose business it is to write the market reports would ignore his existence," end of quote. It is tempting to suggest that in the accelerated temporality of secular modernity, there is simply no time for long-term, let alone eternal considerations. But this is not necessarily the case. Adam Smith believed that the accumulation of capital is propelled precisely by sacrificing short-term advantages for long-term ones. And it has been brought up in one of the panels that he believed that it was the virtue of prudence, not boundless risk-taking that market society was supposed to foster. And for that matter, Balzac makes the religious message no less pronounced in this novel. Freed from the curse, old Melmoth passes away in a grandiose manifestation of divine grace. The priest who served him the final rites testifies that after confessing his sins, Melmoth earned penitence and died happily. And what is more, in his moment of dying, the hands of God was visibly stretched out above him. Here, what Balzac does here is that he reconfigures the original scene of Melmoth's sublime damnation. And we might also say that he eliminates the probability dimension from Pascal's argument, because he notes that Melmoth dies in the certain knowledge that he would go to heaven. Balzac stages the dynamic interrelations of desire, pleasure, and the passing of time from another angle in the Wild Ass Skin. With a metonymic inversion, if you like, whereas Melmoth suffers from the tortures of a too long life, Raphael is struck by the horrors of a shrinking one. And the two stories are interconnected, as is usually the case with Balzac, on the level of characters. Because Castagnier is Mistress Aquilina and the prostitute Euphrasia, in whose in whose bedroom Melmoth's contract reached a sexual and a metaphysical climax, they also appear in Raphael's company. The Wideskin has several significant scenes that take place at a gaming house, and the trope of gambling seems to be all over the text. When Raphael sets out to economize his spendings so he can accomplish his treatise, The Theory of the Will, in 3 years' time, he says that it was as if I had laid a wager with myself, for I was at once the player and the cards. And Pascal seems to be hunting subtext to all his ventures, as you can see on the slide. In one of the orgies, they have Emile cries out that I would cheerfully pay 100 sous to any mathematician who would prove the existence of hell to me by an algebraic equation. And he flings up a coin and cries, heads for the existence of God. Don't look, Raphael cried, pouncing upon the coin. Who knows? Suspense is so pleasant. With a more explicit and even more ironic nod, when he learns that the mechanical apparatus or the machine that he wants to use to stretch out the skin again was invented by none other than Blaise Pascal, he makes the promise that if the experiment is successful, it won't be, he would erect a colossal statue of Pascal and also build an asylum for impoverished and insane mathematicians. The novel also tackles Pascal's wager in more conceptual ways. Because whereas Melmoth's faith in Balzac's reconfiguration blurs, as I suggested earlier, the division between pleasure and pain by showing that they are mutually constitutive, the Wideskin points to a relativistic, subjective sense of time that seems to undermine the very opposition between finite and infinite in Pascal's argument. I should like to live in the lap of luxury a year or 6 months, no matter, and then afterwards die. I should have known, exhausted and consumed 1,000 lives at any rate. One day of our life is worth 10 years of a bourgeois existence. So just as values fluctuate, so does the experience of lived time and the amount of pleasures that a certain temporal unit may contain. Another, what I would say, a paradigmatic variant of the Faustian bargain is offered in Robert Louis Stevenson's novella The Bottle Imp, written in 1891. Here we have a demon locked up in a bottle that grants all your wishes, but you may only pass it on with a loss that is at a lower price than bought. And the last owner obviously burns in hell. So Stevenson reframes the bargain in a colonial context and relocates it in the Pacific Ocean. And the native Hawaiian Kiwi is the main protagonist who comes across the wishing bottle in San Francisco and buys it for $50. And he passes it on safely, but unfortunately later he needs to repurchase it in order to cure himself from leprosy at the price of 2 cents. That is under the predicament that he wouldn't be able to resell it again because no one could be expected to buy it at 1 cent and thus become the final purchaser. Whereas in Balzac's version of Melmoth, the value of the deal was decreasing due to the lack of confidence of purchasers. Here in Stevenson's, it is precisely the necessity of reaching ever lower prices that drives the process of exchange. And while in Balzac's world, the use of paper-based credit instruments like stock bonds lends a sense of financial unboundedness to the bargain. Here in the Bottle Imp, it is stipulated that the bottle can only be sold for coined money. So no paper currencies, please. And this predicament seems to put a final limit to the deal. But what comes to Kiwi's rescue in the end is the colonial monetary system. Because it turns out that what was sold for 1 US cent could be passed on for 5, 4, 3, 2, or 1 centime on the French island of Tahiti, which is precisely what Kiwi does in the end. Placing Stevenson's story in the context of the utilitarian ethical debate, that is the sense of duty on the one hand, and a Benthamite consequentialism, that is a cost-benefit analysis of action on the other in the Victorian era, the bottle story has been interpreted as some sort of a gift economy by which you put someone else in. So the bottle puts you in the depth of in others' debt, or in debt of somebody else. And I quote Kevin McLaughlin's article on this. He says, "The minute you take the bottle, you owe someone the difference between the price you paid for the bottle and the necessarily lower price for which you must sell it. The bottle becomes the token of this obligation to pay in the future, an obligation for which your life is pledged as a caution." End of quote. As such, the bottle seems to involve a negative ethical responsibility, namely the obligation to save yourself by the ruin of another, of someone else. However, in Stevenson's story, we also witness the opposite. Because nearing the final stages, the two lovers, Kiwi and his wife, Kokua, they both choose to sacrifice themselves to save the other from the curse. Pascal's wager is a parable of probability. Stevenson's story, in turn, has been widely discussed as a paradox of game theory. In these considerations of prediction or rational choice, defining hell as an infinite negative utility, the bottle should be, as a rule, worthless. Given that no one would buy it for 1 cent and become the last buyer, no one would buy it for 2 cents either, because then one would still be without a customer. Consequently, no one would buy it for 3 cents or 4 cents and so on either. So it's an impossible transaction from the very beginning. But from another angle, it's also shown that the knowledge of earlier purchases influence the judgment of later buyers. And evidencing decision tendencies, they could prompt further purchases. Although as the price falls, there is a fine line beyond which buying becomes unjustified. And we should note that the characters in Stevenson's story are well aware of this. I quote, "The bottle was hard enough to sell at 4 centimes, and at 3 it will be quite impossible. The margin is not broad enough." Or, "What chance had she to sell the bottle at 2 centimes? None," she perceived. She does in the end, though. For others, these evaluations of the probability of safe escape from this maze make the story reminiscent of pyramid schemes. That is, dubious or fraudulent financial constructions where your gain depends on the right timing of sale and your ability to find someone who will take your place and suffer the loss. And indeed, this ideal of the smart investor is held up in the novella by the first seller, who tells Kiwi that, I quote, "All you have to do is to use the power of the imp in moderation, and then sell it to someone else, as I do to you, and finish your life in comfort." That's the smart investor. Rational agents, it is argued in game theory, will not agree to participate in such a scheme at any step. However, if there is an arbitrarily small probability of a bailout or amnesty, which would grant the last agent the same gain as other participants who escaped in time, the proposal may still be accepted. An amnesty or bailout may come in the form of a poorly informed or a reckless outsider, a sucker, as they call it in these theories, who simply doesn't know or doesn't care. In Balzac's Melmoth, this is the stockbroker who embraces damnation in the ecstasy of love. In Bottle Imp, it is a drunkard seaman. "I'll tell you," said Kiwi, "the man who has that bottle goes to hell. I reckon I'm going anyway," returned the sailor. "And this bottle's the best thing to go with, I've struck you." Yeah, so at the beginning of his novella, Stevenson notes that his source for the story was a melodramatic romance played at London theaters in 1828. But this stage play, The Bottle Imp, however, drew on another text, namely Friedrich de la Motte Fouquet's novella, first appeared in 1810, Eine Geschichte von Galgenmännlein, The Story of the Hangman, which appeared in two English translations in the 1920s. That's where the people who staged the play got their ideas from. De la Motte Fouquet's story is set in the 17th century German and Italian lands. And again, you have a little creature locked up in a bottle that grants the wishes of whoever possesses it. In return, he wants their soul for his master Lucifer, obviously. And you may transfer the bottle by selling it for a smaller sum than you have given for it. And after a series of hilarious and violent transactions involving scenes of gambling, warfare, prostitution, heavy drinking, the merchant who bought it at the beginning of the story is stuck with it at the price of one farthing, the smallest possible denomination. So all seems to be lost, but then he comes across a black giant who is bound to the devil for a yearly payment of 100,000 gold pieces anyway. So he already belongs to the devil, so he agrees to buy the imp for a base coin that is issued in a German princedom that chooses to pursue a monetary policy of depreciating or debasing currency. So there's always an even more invaluable coin with which the transfer can be made. So all in all, you do not need postmodern finance or pyramid schemes to cheat your peers or the devil. The manipulations of the monetary reality in early modern Europe would perfectly do. Okay, and in conclusion, I would like to bring up Josef Vogel's work on calculation and passion, Kalkül und Leidenschaft, in which he explored a wide-reaching paradigm shift in the status of economic knowledge around 1800, leading from the old economy of balancing out passions and interest, needs and surpluses, to the unchained and self-destructive reign of a desiring, laboring, consuming, and self-consuming subject that is the modern economic man, cursed with an infinite striving for finite goods. This transformation from the state of equilibrium to that of expansive equilibrium, I suggest, cuts across the sequence of the narratives of the Faustian bargain I discussed today. As we saw, conceptions of gamble, chance, and probability had emerged at the intersections of theological debates and the rise of modern commercial society, which is on many levels a gambling society, and continue to inform these narratives as parables of modern existence enmeshed in incessant speculative predictions. And as we saw in the Wileskind, desire eats away life, yet in that novel there is an ultimate balance that is maintained between life and death, desire and destruction. So it seems that it belongs to what Vogel describes as the old economy of balance. While in the Melmoth novel, which is seemingly more conservative with its religious message, this novel is strikes us as more modern for introducing the sense of self-undermining desire and a state of this equilibrium. But and if I add one more thing, that in Fouquet or Stevenson, you don't see indications of the existential anxieties that Balzac tackles here. Only the price shrinks, but it merely defines your position vis-a-vis others confronted with these ultimate utility of damnation. But what I would suggest, these stories as exercises in metaphysical, moral, and economic loss gain calculus, long and short-term risk probabilities nonetheless seem to share, is a peculiar image of playing, which is a rather grim image. So from this perspective, playing is not the source of culture, not the last resort of human freedom, not a safe haven from the market, but a messy and mean practice, a conduit of anxiety, greed, violence, and madness. And as coda, I would offer a suggestion that we might read the Faustian bargain as an allegory of the writing of literature itself. So you might want to look at how all this informs the modern social ontology of literature, if you like. Because in the preface to Mahmud the Wanderer, Maturin apologizes for coming forward with yet another work of fiction. I cannot again appear before the public in so unseemly a character as that of a writer of romances, without regretting the necessity that compels me to it. Did my profession furnish me with the means of subsistence, I should hold myself culpable indeed in having recourse to another. But am I allowed the choice? So what we have here is so Maturin reconfigures Mahmud's story as an allegory for literary writing. So he portrays himself in the position of selling his soul to the demon of the literary market in a sort of spiritual damnation, and by insisting that he's not given a choice, even seem to recall the structure of Pascal's wager, where gambling is not an option. And I have all the authors that I discussed today, their portraits, because to different extents they were all involved in this Faustian bargain of engaging in the horrors of the literary market. Thank you so much.
But thank you very much, Sandor, for this grand tour of theology, literature, and modern economics. I think we still have a couple of minutes left. So I would like to suggest that maybe we can have a few questions to start with, and then we can continue over lunch our conversations. You had a question, right? Thank you.
Thanks, Sandor. Yeah.
Good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you. I'm great help, and I learned a lot. So I just have very few questions. And actually, I've been thinking of Bergman's The Seventh Seal. You know, when you play chess with death, right? In the context of what you were talking about. But my question is actually, you mentioned. One first question is that you mentioned. I wrote it down. When the receiving of grace as a gift from God, right? Or salvation as a gift from God. And I'm wondering if you've been considering the Calvinist streak and the Calvinist tradition here, because and here I would maybe Enoch, for example, was writing about, right? When in the Calvinist tradition, you are supposed to passively receive the gift of God, kind of, rather than being involved in those exchange and speculations that you were so brilliantly describing. And my other question, or question-comment, is about any kind of alternatives to these speculations. And here what comes to mind is Emerson, who says, famously says, right, put God in your debt. So what will happen if we reverse this structure, and instead of being in debt of God in this kind of moral gift economy, we would put God in your debt? Yes. Thank you.
Maybe we should collect a few questions, and then you can answer them together.
Yeah.
Okay. Any more questions?
Yeah, thank you very much for your compelling talk. I really enjoyed it, and I learned a lot as well. I was wondering about to what extent Balzac engages with Adam Smith's theory of the invisible hand, because you mentioned that a bit, and how you mentioned some other elements that were related to it as well. So I'd be interested to know that as a Gothic trope, what other similar models you might find, economic Gothic trope models that are comparable. That would be interesting. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Well, honestly, as to the theological nuances of this, I'm afraid I'm not able to elaborate on it, because I mean, as far as I can see, it makes sense to me that in a Protestant world you have this ultimate uncertainty, but in a Catholic, like for Balzac, then it's possible to say that being certain of salvation as Mahmoud dies in the end. But yeah, so I'm not very knowledgeable about the these niceties of Protestant theology. So why would Emerson say that you should put God in your lap? I really can't. It's probably you, because that's pretty much your field. So I think that you can give a better answer to that. I think what about the Adam Smith? I mean, you don't need explicit knowledge of economic thinking to play with these tropes, I believe, and I don't know if Balzac had any knowledge of Adam Smith's work, but it was pretty much in the air, I believe, and vampirism is I think it's particularly interesting because it's famously there in Balzac, in Marx as the mechanism as capital works, that it sucks out the blood of society and leaves it in this in bloodless dead existence. But what interests me is that you could I mean, it's in vampirism you put an end to circulation in a sense, but when you stop the circulation of blood in one person, but then again you channel it into other veins, right? So it really goes both ways as far as the vampire of global capitalism works, and I think that's pretty much what we see.
Maybe we have time for one more question or comment. Yes.
Maybe I will speak aloud. Thank you for your talk. I've been remembering Bret Harte's very short legend, which he calls The Devil and the Broker, a medieval legend, where he operates in strictly economical terms, where the devil catches the souls of people, and he catches the soul of a broker who borrows the angle from the devil and starts catching it, and there appear some economic terms. And I was wondering, why is the connection between theology and economy or financial frauds? Because the broker turns out to invent some kind of, not a pyramid, but a trick. Why is the connection so tight, and which draws upon which? Is it economy that draws on theology, or theology that draws on economy?
Well, yeah, that's the. I can refer you back to this, and so it's pretty much in the gospel. So that's these whole things are mutually implicated on a figurative level in the parables, of course. And while preparing for this lecture, I ran across this book, The Economics of the Parables, and I learned that there is an ongoing debate in the United States, obviously, whether Christ was a socialist or a capitalist. So whether he because on the one hand he encouraged us to was that to multiply the gifts that, or the talentums that we are given. But on the other hand, you have this inverted relationship between gain and loss. So earthly gain should lead to eternal loss and all that. So I think it's encoded in religion in a way, and that's something that pretty much resonates with current political.
Christian religion or religion in general?
Well, that's a tough one. The question was asked from Balzac as well. So that the multiple gods argument against Pascal's wager was that it's not, Pascal's argument would work for any religion. So it's not a Christian. It's not essentially a Christian argument and you don't have in Stevenson's story, you don't have Christians either. But so it's also interesting to see that how Balzac's Orientalism, might point to Stevenson's admiration of Polynesia so how he tried to make it turn it into a more general parable that is applicable to not only to Christians but to and it is, so it works within at least for a European reader, it seems to work perfectly within a Polynesian or Pacific context. Probably natives would say otherwise, but at least as an attempt to generalize it or take the trope beyond Christianity or Western culture.
I would very much like to thank Sandor again for this fascinating talk. Please give him one more round of applause. And I'm sure he is going to be very happy to engage in further conversation over the sandwiches that are awaiting us downstairs in the foyer where we came in. And please do come back for 2 o'clock when we have the second book prize, and 2:30 is the time for the General Assembly. So please have your sandwiches, talk to Sandor, and then come back by 2. Thank you. Pleasure.